Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 45. Wow. And welcome to the new year. Of course, we welcomed you to Happy New Year last week, but, we're still in January, so I think it still counts. Charlie, how are you today?
I am good. It's been a very busy new year thus far. Lots going on. So yeah, but I am there's the sort of sadness or concern note with all the fires going on in Southern California. My family that is still in California is thankfully not in any of the fire zones at the moment, but clearly our heart goes out to everybody that's being impacted by it. It's pretty remarkable. As someone born and raised in California and very used to Southern California fire season. I mean, truly, I've never seen anything like this. I mean, just absolutely insane.
Yeah, being in the Bay Area, I think of San Francisco being a 7 by 7 city, 49 square miles. There are fires in the LA area that are larger than that, like in and of themselves. Like these are just massive scale. These are fires that would literally cover most cities in the United States entirely, end to end, border to border. So yeah, it's just a tough time for them. Right now all they can do is literally push as hard as they can against the borders of these fires. There's nothing else like beyond the politics, beyond the budgets. Like all you can do right now is throw as much water at this thing as you can and hope you can find more. There's nothing, it's unprecedented. So good luck to
Always a gut
everybody in
check for
LA.
me. I mean, I think what we do in the tech industry is all very, very important, but the physical world is still where we live our lives, and something like a fire reminds us of exactly how important the physical world really is. So yeah,
And the real
absolutely.
heroes, those firefighters out there. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. But nevertheless, there is still plenty of news, although it was a pretty quiet week as it comes to enterprise tech news, I would say.
Yeah, I think part of that was because we had CES last week, which obviously was huge for consumer tech and always has been. But also, we're in this kind of waiting period right now. We got past the beginning of the year, and now we're doing things like sales kickoffs, and we're going to have a new president. All these things that are just kind of leading to kind of setting the stage for whatever's going to happen next month. So this is a good week to just hunker down and do some work.
Exactly. So let's kick this off at CES. I think these were all at CES. I'm not sure, but NVIDIA certainly shook it up a little bit. I always find it curious. I actually almost went to CES this year. I've never been. Well, I think I went one like 20 years ago, but I've never been sort of recently, and it's always this really interesting dynamic. It is ostensibly a consumer tech show. So, by rights, you would think, well, there's no reason for people like us to go. And yet, you always get this sort of smattering of announcements that either are directly enterprise related or have this sort of tangential element to it. And so certainly some of that was out of NVIDIA kind of making some noise around it. And so they were probably the most active this week, I would guess, I would say, as far as announcements. So I guess you can cue us up of what struck you out of CS from them.
Yeah, so I've been to CES a few times, especially when I was doing more work around mobile devices and video systems, back when that was still much more groundbreaking than it is now. And the consumer tech was really leading the way. And I think part of the challenge for people like us going in recent years is that it's felt like it's a lot about smart refrigerators and cars. And, those things are cool, but not necessarily things that we would really care about from an IT perspective. But this time around, I think one of the things that really stuck out, as you said, was how pervasive NVIDIA was here. They had already had an in for CES because of their video game business, but now they're just talking straight up about their AI capabilities. And I think the one announcement that got my attention most, out of several important ones here, was around their Project Digits project, their new desktop, basically supercomputer that allows you to be able to work with AI at your desk without having to go into the cloud and being able to develop, work with the NVIDIA software stack. They're selling this computer for something like $3,000 as a starting point, which I think as an IT department, that's a no-brainer. Like if you don't have one of these on your desk, you're not really thinking about AI at this point. Even for very small companies, this is a price point that is obviously very approachable for the CIO office.
It was shocking on a bunch of different levels from my standpoint. The first is it speaks to, we've talked about before how expensive it is to build and train and the inference of these, and this is clearly targeted at developers, right? That are needing to build these AI-driven apps and need that sort of horsepower to do it. Um, so if you were questioning whether or not that really was an issue, it clearly is, and this product I think speaks to that need. I'm also just beyond shocked at the price point. I mean, it is, to your point. I mean, it's just ridiculously low. I mean, you can easily spend that on a MacBook. I mean, it's crazy for that price point. I'm also really curious about their ability to deliver it. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's Blackwell based, right? And so
Right.
they've had significant issues with chip delivery, and obviously these are going to be the lower end versions of them, but it is interesting if they're able to meet the demand of this, which I presume is going to be relatively high. So that part I thought was an interesting little sidebar, given how restricted GPUs have been.
Mhm.
If this signals that they've caught up with capacity or what. So, it was interesting on a bunch of different fronts, and clearly is another signal and sign, perhaps of the beginning of the end for NVIDIA, and I say that tongue in cheek, but what I mean is you see this with all these big companies, is they've reached a point where the bread and butter isn't enough to sustain the growth rates that their multiples demand, and so therefore they rapidly start expanding into a bunch of other areas to try to cover their bases and find new areas to grow into. And this sort of strikes me as one, right? Not as, I mean, this is at least sticking to the knitting in terms of it's a chip or chip based, but that part I thought was interesting. But I think we're also seeing in some of the other announcements they made, as far as they're spreading their tentacles wide and deep to try to make sure they can continue to find new pathways to growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is really smart if they can actually deliver. As you said, GPUs have definitely been a challenge from a supply chain perspective. And having an actual GPU in each one of these computers it seems like it's going to be extremely challenging if you're going to get, say, 100,000 of these out to every company under the sun that's going to want these. Because any $10 million company, frankly, is going to want one of these to have an idea of how all this works.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting. A couple of the other announcements they made, that one that I was very interested in was they announced a new set. I'm trying to remember what they're calling them. A Nemotron, a family of LLMs based on Meta's Llama, which also interesting. But here's what I found most interesting about this particular announcement is that it's explicitly, these models are basically designed for agentic AI use cases,
Mhm.
which is, obviously all agentic AI use cases use LLMs at their core for the generative elements of it. But we haven't really heard anyone talking too much about specifically tuning LLMs for that use case per se. And so I thought that was an interesting development, and again another interesting sort of push by NVIDIA. And the last one I'll just throw out. It's really sort of tangential, but they also announced some specific efforts around robotics, physical robotics, and supporting that, where going that. So again, these are just two areas that were sort of out of the mainstream, both very related, both make sense, but clearly trying to expand their footprint.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if NVIDIA can successfully break out models and perhaps chip types for specific types of use cases over time, whether this kind of instruction-based model optimization actually takes off, or whether vendors will actually work on their own agentic models, which I would think they would rather do. Like, honestly, at the end of the day, does Salesforce or ServiceNow or IBM really want to depend on NVIDIA's version of agentic modeling, or will they want to use their own? I think that might be a little bit of a dead end for NVIDIA at the end of the day, but obviously NVIDIA understands that they want to be the Kleenex or the Xerox of AI, so ubiquitous that all you want to call it, NVIDIA-ing it, or we'll find a better verb for it. But basically, having their brand being ubiquitous and synonymous with AI, they know that's the race at this point for them.
Well, I do wonder. I mean, one of the things that struck me with both of these announcements and sort of in combination is, the foundation of their business has been supplying these chips to companies like OpenAI and Microsoft and others who are building the foundational models. If you sort of looked at that stack, and then they've increasingly been building the software layer, and now they have the agentic LLM layer. And so and then you look at the competition coming specifically, in my mind, coming from like Amazon, right, where they have AWS Bedrock. They've been building their own chips. Clearly, the sort of competitive stack. And it does sort of make me wonder if NVIDIA eventually goes there, right? Because I agree with you. I think if you're selling to the model players and to the major software companies who all have an incentive to build their own LLMs and to control that, I think that's a tough sell. To your point, where I think there is a very open, some open runway here is targeting the enterprise, right? So one of the things I've been talking about a lot is that the enterprise is going to be investing across the entire buy versus build spectrum. They're going to be buying some off-the-shelf AI technologies where it makes sense, and from my view, it's mostly when you're looking at productivity and those sort of non-differentiated business values. And then the other end of the spectrum, when you're delivering an AI solution specifically in a way that delivers competitive differentiation in the market, you're going to want to build that. You're going to want to control it and make it specific to your organization. And, but they're not going to have the resources to do all of this themselves. And so that's where AWS is a great fit, right? I can, effectively rent the chips, build it on their platform, and just get something on the other end that I can put into production. I could see NVIDIA going and eventually trying to compete on that, where they can do a full stack to an enterprise or a small, ISV, a small software company that doesn't have the resources of the ServiceNow or Salesforce. So it'll be interesting to see if that's where this is going.
Yeah, NVIDIA has definitely put a lot of focus on software compared to their competitors like AMD. And I think that's really shown in the ease of use that people tend to consider NVIDIA with from an AI perspective, which is really part of their competitive advantage as well. Of course, they've got the performance advantage, but they've also got this usability advantage at this point. And it'll be interesting to see how that works out, and whether you mentioned a little bit about how ISV potential. I think about how some of the server companies like HPE made run on FinOps solutions back in the day. Like HPE bought this small company called Cloud Cruiser and turned it into their HPE consumption analytics solution. And I could see NVIDIA also doing something like that with some of the agent orchestration and agent management companies that are coming into place as NVIDIA tries to have this full third-party ecosystem from soup to nuts, everything having to do with AI.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to see where that all lands and how it develops. And as we talked about before, this entire sector is a battle for the agents, or for the giants, I should say, at this level anyway, right? When you're deep at that foundational infrastructure level.
But you also mentioned this thing about agents in robotics, which is a cool combination, and one that NVIDIA is not alone in pursuing. Of course, NVIDIA has recently talked about this, and the idea of having slightly more autonomous robots, or robots that can take more direct direction from their ecosystem is an interesting one, because often we see robotics capabilities that are extremely advanced at this point, but unable to make great decisions in an open world environment. Like when you look at those Boston Dynamics robots that are doing backflips and stuff, you think, wow, but then you realize what a programmed environment they are in when they are doing those backflips, and realize, oh, this is not exactly Simone Biles doing backflips. It's a very different type of athletic capability that is happening at this point. But the idea of having some agentic feedback going along with that is an interesting concept.
Well, and it's not, I think it's not just agentic. In fact, this speaks to what another giant is doing in some of the other news that Google has announced that they formed a new team that is building AI to simulate the physical world. And this has always been a big gap, right? In fact, we've talked a lot about some of the criticisms around Gen AI. And one of those criticisms was that their perspective, the perspective of an LLM, was strictly in sort of this text-based view of the world, lacked that sort of physicality to understand the relationships from a physical perspective. This has always been one of the issues, and clearly one of the issues that has hindered robotics in this, the way we, in the iRobot movie sort of way that we would think about how they operate. And so I think it's going to be interesting. To me, this was the other meaningful news, that Google is making some serious investments in this way, and it's going to obviously impact things like gaming, and But I think putting an enterprise lens on this, not only do we have things like robotics, but when we talk about digital twins, being able to understand how a piece of equipment is going to actually operate in the real world, because we can now fully simulate it, and now leverage AI to actually model that out and create tests. I think this with this technology will eventually, and we're probably years still away, but it will eventually come together, and I think be truly transformative in how we can start leveraging this technology.
Yeah, this combination of having these global models or these world models that simulate the real world, the existence of digital twins, which is now probably at least a decade old concept, but still hasn't been fully realized, honestly, at the level that is needed to simulate reality. And then all the work that's happened in the video game world, like I'm probably dating myself here, but talking about something like the Unreal Engine and how that transformed video games when it provided 3D capabilities in interactions across the board, and what programmers were able to do with that. Bridging all of these capabilities together is going to make these models, world models, much more helpful. Right now, we went through this dead end where we were talking about the metaverse and augmented reality and virtual reality and how that was going to change our lives. But one of the biggest problems was that none of these virtual reality systems were able to simulate the world. There was no world model, and there was no truly immersive simulation at the level of immersiveness that humans need to actually buy in at a global level. So a lot of interesting. Now we have the potential to start working in that direction. I think Google's a great company to pursue this. Obviously, their work on the Alphabet side with Waymo shows that they are making some real positive steps in being able to look at the real world and provide services that are accepted by normal human beings. So that's a real advantage in this space where everybody else is talking about models and chips, but don't have an actual service that they can point to where they've been able to make this work.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I mean, and just for the record, I'm still bullish on the metaverse. I'm still a believer in in what it represents, and I think it's going to be one of those technologies that we kind of come full circle around. But that aside, I agree. I think it's going to be. I mean, I'm super excited about the state of technology, about the state of development. I think it's the nature of hype cycles. It's easy to get sort of discouraged, and it's like, well, what's really happening with this? But I think I look at forward over the next like decade, and I mean, I think it's going to be staggering. Speaking of staggering, a new study out by KPMG has put some really shocking numbers on the board for me a little bit. And I know that you want to talk about some of the other data, but the one that stood out for me is they have part of their finding was that the average enterprise, and I don't know that I saw that it dictated how large of a company, but it doesn't even matter, that the average enterprise, 68% of them are planning to invest between 50 million and $250 million in Gen AI next year, as in, I presume that means to be this year, 2025.
Yep.
That's a shocking number. That's a huge, huge number. for enterprise, right? This is above and beyond their general tech spend. And, we've reported other data that the AI budgets are still right now sort of living in their own bucket. And this is, clearly one of the reasons why. And so it speaks to, and it goes on, it speaks to a couple of things, right? The fact that one, we are still seeing the elusiveness of ROI. It's like we can't really, enterprises are really struggling to demonstrate that ROI. And so for me, while I have gone on record saying I think this is the year of putting AI into production and we're going to start really seeing that migration, those kind of investments demand ROI. I mean, how do you make $250 million investment and not be able to show ROI? So it's going to be really interesting to see how CIOs and how enterprises are dealing with that. But it also speaks to just this amazing commitment to the promise of all of it. And part of me is a little worried. I mean, I am very bullish on the technology. I'm very bullish on its transformative impact. But I also know how this works, and it's going to take time. Just changing the culture of organizations to truly adapt and adopt how we apply this within the enterprise is just going to take years. And so I worry that this is going to get like a black eye, that companies put all this money in and say, well, where's my return? What have you done for me in the last 6 months? And are not going to be able to prove it. And it's going to kind of create this backlash. But we'll see. I mean, what was your take on that and some of the other data out of KPMG?
Yeah, I worry a little bit that we're putting the cart before the horse, not because I don't think AI is capable of doing a lot of work, but because I think AI might be mistakenly sold as a way to fully replace jobs at this point. And ignoring for a moment the like whether that's ethical or right or not, I think we simply don't have the infrastructure to actually make that happen. If I am replacing a low to mid-level developer with AI, honestly, we know that AI code tends to be less efficient at this point. There tend to be errors. It's hard for AI to think about contextualizing something through a full multiple chains of thought for something complex like enterprise software. So how do we check with that, and how do agents how do these ROI how do these agents look to supporting AI actually get better and get managed? Who's doing the managing? Like all this stuff is not really worked out very well at this point. And I feel like that's a minimum perspective of where you would need to be to have AI actually replace an employee. You have to have some sort of management structure and feedback structure that is actually in place. And then on the flip side, I think looking simply at productivity without being able to replace jobs means that you may be looking at these little tiny tasks that don't actually provide value. So if you're turning a 7-second job into a 3-second job, like in theory, that sounds like you're getting productivity of over 50%. But in reality, what is a human going to do in those extra 4 seconds? That's not enough time to actually switch and do something else in reality. So that's not actually saved time at the end of the day. You're actually saving 0 time. That's not actually a productivity benefit. So we're going to see these fake productivity benefits as well as a way to justify AI in a way that's not meaningful. So we'll see what happens there. Yeah.
It is always tough. I mean, these are studies. These are basically, surveys, I should say, right? They're asking people's opinion, and so it always is difficult to ferret out. I do think it's interesting that there's another piece that I guess I didn't save either, but it talked about the fact that there's sort of code being used in a lot of the public companies in their investor reports where they're talking about being able to delay hiring of new workers, right? So. And it's this code for this productivity improvement. And there's some interesting debates as to whether or not we're in fact seeing productivity improvement, or to what degree we're able to measure it. But what I think is interesting is I think the conversation is going to have to evolve and to be more nuanced, right? So I think that there's versions of it, right? If I have a class of workers who do a highly repetitive task and I can shave 25 or 50% time off of that repetitive task, well, that should result in an actual demonstrable gain, because I can now do 100 tasks in the time that it used to take me to do 50 tasks. And so that should mean I can translate to hiring half the number of people or doubling my workload without having to hire more people. And so there's that level. And then there's the knowledge worker who is doing all kinds of task switching and optimization, and then the question is, well, if I'm optimizing at that micro task level, yeah, I'm probably just going to, drink a coffee during those extra few seconds, and it's not going to actually translate into anything. And then the question is, in other cases, can I actually replace jobs, or can I actually restructure flows entirely? We talked about this last week in that professor who was talking about the AI organization and restructuring. And I think to really do that level, that you do need to do that. Right now, we are talking about completely re-envisioning business processes, because right now, if all you do is go fire all your junior developers, you're probably not going to get the gain you think you're going to get, because that productivity gain is going to get lost in now having these senior developers try to manage this workflow that they wouldn't have had to do otherwise. So I think there's all these different moving parts, and I think that's the continuing difficulty in this. But anyway, going back to the KPMG report, there was a couple other interesting aspects of it. The first was the agentic AI, right? And in full disclosure, company that I'm working with, Symphony AI, has a whole new agentic AI solution that I'm helping to work on. So this is something that I'm paying very close attention to. But I had to read it twice, actually. It says that over half, 51% of organizations are exploring the use of AI agents. Another 37% are piloting AI agents, and 12% are deployed in use and having agents deployed in use. And you look at that and you can easily take the headline and go, well, only 12% are in production. Well, first of all, it's brand new, but do the math and add all those numbers up. And that means 100% of the people they talk to are exploring, piloting, or deploying agents right now. That's a staggering number. I mean, I don't know if I even believe it, to be honest. So I think it's another interesting statement of where this sort of optimism is. And going back to my other statement, I remain concerned that the hype cannot possibly live up to the reality of how long this is going to actually take to see value from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm one of the findings that got my attention, maybe in a cautionary way, is that they stated that quality of organizational data was the biggest anticipated challenge to AI strategies, according to 85% of respondents, followed by data privacy and security, 71%, and then employee adoption, 46%. And those are all well and good, but we've just spent the past few minutes talking about how the actual work definitions and management issues are going to be a big issue in getting actual value out of AI as well. And the fact that that didn't make the top three does worry me, because I actually think the data issue, although important, may be a bit overstated, because one of the values of generative AI is its ability to extrapolate from data and to provide directional guidance, which is the right way to think about this. If we're looking for absolute 100% factual accuracy from generative AI, that's not even the right use case for something like this. But being able to look at, say, several months of interactions and being able to summarize what are the biggest themes associated with this person's call center work or sales work or service work or productivity or research findings, that's a much better use case. But not having the right system to be able to figure out how to deal with all of that, I think, is going to be possibly even a bigger issue than dealing with data and security issues, only because we have a lot of experience in how to work with data. Data security isn't really a secret. It's a challenge, but it's not a secret the way that working with AI is still to some extent a secret.
So I agree. Well, I agree on a certain level. I mean, I agree with your core premise. I think the understanding how to work with it, understanding how we're going to drive the cultural transformation necessary to change the way we work in the enterprise to leverage it is going to be an unquestionable, I think, the longer standing issue. What I do think is interesting about the data quality, data governance, data privacy concerns is that they are the issues that I think are going to stop organizations from getting out of the starting blocks. And I think it's going to expose in a lot of enterprises just the bad state they're going to be in. And I think there's going to be not an insignificant number of CIOs who end up finding excuses to shelve some of these projects because it exposes just how poor their current data quality, data governance, and privacy controls are.
Mhm.
And so it's like, oh no, the quality isn't good enough, and it's going to be the AI's fault, when the reality is it's going to be those internal issues. So I think those are the most important from the short term, because they're the things that are going to stop you from getting a pilot even off the ground, right?
Mhm.
But I think long term, I agree. I mean, I think that it's right now, I think for a lot of organizations, they don't even know what they don't know. Um,
Yes, but
so that's
and
going
I
to
think
be the
that in addition to the data governance, your agentic governance is going to end up being your API governance and your application integration governance, which are additional areas where, again, companies are going to find out, oops.
Yeah, exactly. And talking about oops, I think it's another interesting thing. OpenAI, and it's not the actual announcement I found interesting, but OpenAI, I guess in Sam Altman, Sam, let's see if I can get his name.
Sam Altman, yep.
Dan Altman, thank you. Had an interview where he basically talked about how they sort of picked this $200 a month price for the Chat GPT Pro out of thin air, and it looks like they now are saying they're probably still losing money on it. Um, that's interesting and noteworthy from if you're an OpenAI follower, because of course they are continuing to burn cash and struggling to lose money, and the fact that they can't be profitable on a $200 per month per user product, you kind of go, holy crap, right? But I think what is more interesting from my perspective, if I kind of put my CIO lens hat on, is it again, it speaks to the general lack of nuance that we have in the enterprise right now, that we view this everything through this sort of one-dimensional lens, right? Microsoft has their co-pilots out for $30 a month, or Salesforce charging everything by conversation, like everything is the same. And I think what the big takeaway here isn't that, oh my God, AI is so expensive, it's never going to be affordable. The big takeaway here is who buys a $200 a month per user per month service?
Mhm.
The absolute crazy power user. So it's not surprising to me that they are blasting the crap out of it and are just consuming a massive amount of resources. But if you go to the average enterprise, you're not going to have that one-dimensional view. You're going to have a handful of these power users, and you're going to have a whole bunch of people that use an AI tool once in a while to do some narrow-banded thing, and then everything in between, right? And so as you are architecting your systems, particularly those that are being consumed internally, you need to be thinking about all these different stratas and how you then orchestrate and architect your solutions around that. And I think that's the big takeaway, is that there's just not enough conversation right now about all the various use cases and the implications of these use cases on cost, structure, governance, all of it.
Yeah, to me, having this $200 a month pro plan, the way that it's currently constructed, is a little bit like Amazon Web Services saying, hey, we're going to give you all of our services for $200 a month and see what you can do with it. Guess what? Their developers are going to find a way to spend a lot more money than that. They will spend millions of dollars, quite literally, if you give them the fire hose to be able to pour every possible service you have across every single bit of data that they have. Developers will figure out how to make that happen, and that's going to be extremely expensive. So I find this pricing idea that you would throw out a $200 a month plan and just hope to make money extremely naive, at a level that frankly no MBA trained marketer would ever do, because you would first think about, how do I control my total cost of ownership? And then cost plus pricing is a very immature way of doing this in the first place. But at least that gives you an idea of where your line is, of where you have to be above to make money. And then you figure out where your actual value proposition is. And in this case, you're looking at the super users who may want to pay $200, $500, $1,000 a month, because they are looking at this as platform as a service, not as a SaaS product that costs $10 a month. And then you make some sort of logical pricing decision of where you should actually be. It is pretty obvious, based on this conversation that Sam Altman had, well, I guess these X posts, that none of that happened. And this is still very much an immature company at the end of the day. OpenAI's technology, fantastic, because they have this philosophy of how to look at AI, which is honestly very good very, compared to competitors. But the pricing, the business model, the actual how do we turn this into a grown up organization, obviously that infrastructure is not there yet.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's very, and look, and I sort of feel for them. I mean, it's a very challenging spot. They're creating
Yeah.
an entire industry, an entire market, and they did, to a certain extent. Well, I mean, in fairness, right? They released this without even knowing that was what was really going to happen. It was
Mm-hmm.
meant to be like much more of a research release anyway. But
Right.
they this was technology backing into a business case, and that's always fraught. And so I think it is interesting, and I think OpenAI. I think they're actually at a little bit of a crossroads here because it is very clear that the original plan, or what I took to be the original plan of them having this partnership with Microsoft, and really Microsoft became sort of the monetization engine. That looks like it's under threat, in
Mm-hmm.
part because of the relationship, in part because Microsoft has their own broader ambitions, and like every other major tech player is investing in their own capabilities around this. I think OpenAI's best play is to figure out how to successfully be a platform player where they're providing infrastructure to others, but they seem to not be able to figure out which way they want to play. They spend a ton of time putting out what I would consider consumer grade. I mean, this is obviously not consumer in that it's a very high price point, but this idea of direct to the consumer kind of an approach, they have
Mm-hmm.
not really cracked the code on the enterprise. And I think that's a losing model because I think, I don't know if it's next year or 5 years from now, but at some point it seems very clear to me that AI at a consumer level is just baked into something else I'm buying. I'm getting it with my Apple iPhone, or I'm getting it with another service. The idea of paying for AI as this independent thing, I think there's a short runway on that. I think the real use cases here are going to be enterprise, some places where people can do a calculation, say I invest $200 a month and I get $1,000 a month in value out of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a no brainer. And I don't think they've cracked that. And I don't know if they know how to go there. And so, we'll see. I certainly am not counting them out by any stretch. I think the technology is fabulous and amazing and has truly already been transformative, but I don't know if they figured out a business model yet.
Frankly, the problem I see with OpenAI isn't that they're burning money. Frankly, I think that given the progress they're making at a big picture, holistic tech level, I think it's fine that they're burning money because Meta spent like $20 billion last year on virtual reality to get zero out of it. OpenAI is obviously making some sort of progress and spending, frankly, less than that. So like the big tech has the money to spend on AI. It's just that the issue for me is simply what is the expectation for OpenAI? If you want OpenAI to keep innovating at, with an open pocketbook, that's actually fine. I think just have that expectation, but trying to create these products and having these obviously unprofitable price points and poorly thought out outputs that are going out, like that to me doesn't make very much sense. I think OpenAI is really bad at pricing and product, frankly. They should really focus on just creating fantastic new services because they obviously are a fantastic research lab. But if they want to be a company, like this is not the way to do it. Like that's not why you should be investing in OpenAI right now for this year, probably even next year. They are still, at cutting edge technology and doing amazing things for services that are coming out across video, probably audio, probably even other senses that they may be thinking about at this point on their pursuit of artificial this generalized artificial intelligence, which I'm kind of iffy about in general overall, but I think has been a very useful approach for OpenAI to create the services that they've created.
Yeah, I do think it's going to be interesting. They actually made some news, some noise on the AGI front this last week as well. We didn't even put it on the list because it's like, okay. But I do think it's interesting. I think I think if nothing else, they're a barometer, and like I said, I found it useful because as a CIO, it helps you start to see where that stratification is breaking down. Speaking of the CIO, as we kind of hit our home stretch, the before we close with our fun little piece, the last article here is from a CIO from CIO.com, and it's from another study. This one by Babson College. Now, what's interesting is the headline is talking about how the majority of respondents were CDOs, chief data officers, and that they basically said that it's going to be a generation, but in the next generation that there'll be the fundamental business transformation within the enterprise. Okay, fine. I didn't find that particularly noteworthy per se, but what I did find interesting is there's sort of this whole subtext about who runs AI, who is the champion of AI in the enterprise. And what's interesting, and maybe not unsurprising given that the primary respondents were chief data officers, but it was you pretty much split down the middle. About half thinks that it's the CIO, and half thinks that it's within the business line of business functions. And I found it interesting on two levels. The first is this has been an ongoing battle. It's like yet another round of people gunning for the CIOs, if not job responsibility and domains. And I'll say the same thing I've said all along, including with chief data officers. If your company is bringing in a chief data officer, a head of AI, any of these functions, it's probably a sign that as a CIO, you are not being viewed strategically enough, and you need to step it up to take that on. The other big thing, though, going back to my nuance question, this would be my hedge on that statement I just made, is that I do think that we need to, again, stop talking about AI within the enterprise as a single class of product, right? I talked a little bit about the buy versus build spectrum when you're focused on internal productivity versus customer based differentiation. I think those are two wildly different things. So if I'm trying to drive competitive differentiation in the market by delivering an AI solution that's going to directly interact with my customers, it actually probably does make sense to have a head of consumer AI or a head of AI focused on those customer facing activities, probably working closely with the CIO who maybe is responsible for providing underlying infrastructure. I think that makes a lot of sense because fundamentally you're delivering a product into the market. It just happens to be a technology based product. But if it's internally consumed and it's focused on the productivity of the employees, I think that technology is absolutely within the CIO's domain, right? Their job is to deliver technology to the enterprise that helps drive productivity and effectiveness and efficiency, and AI should play an absolute fundamental role in that. And so again, I think we need to, even the question is sort of flawed. Who should run AI? Well, that's not a single answer, right? And I think we need to start breaking this up and looking at it with that nuance.
Right. There's always going to be this business-driven capability, the cost of goods sold, where you're going to want a chief revenue officer or somebody in that marketing or sales role to have a real say in what happens from an AI perspective. But the CIO's role is fundamentally around supporting technology at scale, because this is super complicated when you're doing it for 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 people. That's always going to be the case. I don't see a near future where any sort of technology becomes simple to run over 10,000 or 20,000 people. And so that's a fantastic place for the CIO to show their chops and to show that they learned something in the 21st century and to be able to handle the data and logical challenges associated with AI, and to be able to have that network across the executive team to be able to say, I'm going to go to my chief counsel to look at governance issues. I'm going to go to my CFO and see what our publicly reported responsibilities are, and to be able to integrate all of that into a holistic and scalable strategy. That's the CIO job. And if that's not your job as a CIO, you definitely need to rethink what your responsibilities are, or perhaps figure out what your actual job is if you're being labeled as a CIO.
Yep, I think it's a continuing battle, and it's a continuing challenge. I saw another report that I didn't pull in this case because it just maybe angered me, but how your average executive still has no idea what the CIO and the IT department does or is responsible for, and it's like, how can that really be true? But I think it is. I think at least in certain organizations where it is this sort of continuing battle, you have to continually fight. What I will say, if you're a CIO and you work in an organization like that, this is a big opportunity because AI has so much mind share right now that it's the opportunity to reposition and get yourself into that role and to that sort of mindset within your peers once and for all. So take
Yes.
it for what's worth. And then we're going to end on your favorite technology announced at CES. Something that I think truly, at least in your world, is going to change everything, it sounds like.
Yes, absolutely. So in CES, NVIDIA had its moment, Google had its moment, Rivian, Tesla, everybody under the sun had their big announcements, LG, Samsung. But the one that really got my attention was a cat. So there's this adorable cat that was brought out at CES, $25 cat robot, and its job is to blow on your coffee to cool it down to get it ready for you. Of course, this is a huge problem. If you have hot coffee, you want to get ready to drink it, but how are you going to also blow on it and keep it cool when you've got so much other work to do? So as adorable as this little cat, this Nékojita cat is, I think slightly on a serious note, I think what I liked about it is
Wait,
the
there's a
combination.
serious note to FuFu the cat. I want to hear it.
There's a serious note on this. That I love the design. Yeah, it is perfectly made for what it's supposed to do. It will save people's time, and most importantly, one of the big caveats and challenges I have with consumer tech right now is that everything's made to be smart. Everything's meant to get your data and put it into a data center and then track your preferences. This thing just breathes. This thing just blows on your coffee and just does its job without giving away all your information to the rest of
Okay,
the
so
world.
so there is only one person on the Nekojita team that I'm going to go and steal away and hire right now, and that is their chief marketing officer, because this is like the epitome of marketing. Because so this thing is being marketed as FuFu the robot cat. It's just a flippin' fan. That's all it is. It's not. Where's the robotics? Where's there anything about this? It's just a fan. I'm just like,
It's
maybe does it even have a heat sensor? Does it automatically stop blowing when it's cool? At least is that? I mean, is there something in there, or is it literally just a fan? Because if it is, then I've got a whole bunch of robots in my house that I just didn't know they were robots yet.
Hey, it says it just does its job in 3 minutes and cools down your drink. Sometimes that's all you want, a little happy cat
Oh
clawing
my goodness.
on your coffee cup.
Although I have to admit, I mean, all jokes aside, when I was reading through it, I thought, wow, what I mean, it was a gag gift, but what an amazing gag gift to buy somebody. It's like, here's your $25 robotic cat that blows on your coffee.
Sure, it's right
Well,
up there
there
with
you go.
Pogs, Pet Rocks, the Snuggie.
There you go.
So
Well, on that
on
note,
that note, see, you could use it for that drink right there. On that note, that's been another week in enterprise tech and I guess some non-enterprise tech this week. Thanks so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this, had any thoughts, please like, subscribe, comment. Let us know what we should be looking at for next week. Thanks so much for joining us and look forward to talking to you soon.